This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss, co-host of PBS's MotorWeek. He'll take your calls and comments now at 844-885-4677 or email him at radio@goss-garage.com. And now, Pat Goss.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Goss's Garage. I'm Pat Goss. If you'd like to talk about anything that deals with cars, the number's 844-885-4677. And in just a moment, we'll be joined by Mr. John Davis from MotorWeek. But before that, got to tell you something. I've spent years trying to find the secret to eternal life, and guess what? After thousands of pages of information and ads for miracle products that extend life, I've concluded there is no secret when it comes to eternal life. Nope, eternal life is there for the taking. No secrets to it, no miracles. Just use good common sense and it's yours. Oh, sorry. I guess that sounds like life, but I'm talking about the life of cars, not our lives. When you figure out personal immortality, well, please let me know. But in the meantime, how about making your car nearly immortal? Most of us know someone who never has car problems, and their cars seem to last forever. Yet we typically know far more people who kill a car in a few years. What's the difference? Well, maintenance. Simple maintenance. But if you listen to car manufacturers, dealers, and many shops, you barely have to perform any maintenance and your car will live a long life and serve you flawlessly. But think about that. If cars last too long, sales of new cars drop and manufacturers and dealers go out of business. However, if you use common sense and properly maintain your car, you could double its life. Think about it. Every time you double the life of an existing car, you take away a new car sale. Double the life of enough existing cars, and that would be disastrous for car companies and dealers. Never fear, though, because they know how the numbers work. So, do you really think they want you to do the things that can double the usable life of your car? Of course not. Yet, like sheep, you listen to their propaganda, then do the minimum maintenance possible. In the end, you pay an awful price in shorter vehicle life and higher car payments because your car doesn't last the length of your loan. Or maybe you're a smart dummy. You read the ads about pixie dust for your oil or gas, which claims to perform miracles like doubling the life of your engine without changing oil and other such nonsense. Granted, pixie dust does some amazing things in animated movies, but in cars, the age of miracles hasn't arrived yet. Now, if you believe in, buy, use, and expect miracles from pixie dust or miracle in a can, all you're doing is padding the fat pockets of the clever people who figure out catchy marketing plans, then rely on the fact their products won't hurt your car. Truth is, there's no way on earth to prove how long a car would have lasted without the miracle products, which means there's no way to prove they worked. So, what is the secret to automotive immortality? Clean oil, clean coolant, clean transmission fluid, clean power steering fluid. Do you see a pattern here? Clean, clean, clean fluids and good maintenance. There's no such thing on planet Earth as a lubricant for anything that lasts forever. So no matter how many times your dealer, service writer, or tech, or some self-serving manual tells you your transmission is sealed for life and can't be serviced, or your car has lifetime lubricants or coolant, it's all designed to sell new cars, not make your car immortal. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because it is good business after all, but you can beat their system by changing fluids and performing flushes on a good aftermarket schedule, which, by the way, is free at goss-garage.com. Double the life of your car, plus save a ton of money. All right, just something that I thought you might like to know. All right, right now we are joined by Mr. John Davis, the host of MotorWeek. Hi, John.
Good morning, Pat Goss.
How you doing, sir?
I'm just fine, sir. It's a nice, cold, crisp morning. Something everybody has to let their car warm up a little bit more today. Here, at least here in the Mid-Atlantic area.
Yeah.
You probably, I know you, so I know you. Very few things in the automotive world come as a surprise. I'm sure you've read that after 20 years of development and after teasing us a year ago at the Paris Motor Show with showing us the engine, Nissan has finally put their new variable compression turbocharged engine into a vehicle. At LA this week, they showed it in the new QX50, a compact size SUV. And, you know, I don't know whether everybody says, what does it mean? Well, this is the first production engine that actually will have a variable compression ratio, and it's something that not only has Nissan worked on it for a long time, but Saab showed us the concept many, many years ago. The advantage of it is that when you are cruising, it's incredibly fuel efficient, yet when you get on the throttle, it has a great deal of power because of it varies the compression ratio from 14.1 to 8.1. And the 30% they claim fuel economy gain is really the same that you get from going to diesel. So essentially you have a diesel fuel economy without diesel. And you also have a bit more of the traditional quick throttle response you're used to in a gas engine. I haven't driven it yet. I don't know anybody that has, but I do know that Nissan, about 10 years ago, they showed us a concept of it, and the big problem was they couldn't make it last. And if you look at the diagram, I want your comment on this. My heavens, there's the number of working parts and extra levers and everything, and a control shaft and the actuator arms, all this stuff that basically is now attached to the crankshaft. This looks like an amazing feat and maybe a bit of a Rube Goldberg thing at the same time.
You know, the thing that bothers me is knowing how people hate to take care of their cars and so on. You're adding a bunch of bearings in all of this.
Oh yeah,
for the actuator
all of it
and
immersed
so on.
in oil.
Yeah, you've got all of these different bearings now, and some of them are relatively small, and they're all very precise. And now, you know, this doubles the headaches from not changing oil.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think oil changes are going to be, you know, critical is not even the word, because the whole bottom of the engine is now going to be as complex as the top of the engine.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm looking at a diagram right now, and I have to admit, I don't completely understand how it works. I've read about it. I've looked at the diagrams. I'm still not 100% sure how this system works, but I know it's very complicated. It actually only varies the piston height by I think it's 1/4 of an inch, but that's enough to vary the compression a great deal. And of course, it goes to lower compression when the turbocharger kicks in. It goes to higher compression when you're cruising. But if people don't maintain this, this is going to be a nightmare. But of course, that'll probably be something for the second or third owner of the vehicle to find out the hard way.
You know, we're already seeing that with these complex variable valve timing systems and so on. Get a lot of cars in with poor performance and check engine lights and so on, and come to find out some idiot put the wrong oil in, because all of these systems work on oil pressure, and you put a thicker oil in, it raises the oil pressure, lowers the volume but increases oil pressure, and that throws the variable valve timing into a tailspin, and God, it gets to be a mess.
I assume that also would cause the components in it to fail quicker as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So anyway, that was that engine was probably I thought the most interesting technological thing that they showed at the LA Auto Show, which, by the way, is now open to the public. The press days were earlier this week, but there were a number of other things of note. Some of them significant, some of them just sort of like okay. For instance, the Corvette ZR1 convertible, which has already followed the coupe, that's out. There's the new Jeep Wrangler, which we had already seen photos and so forth on, is out, although they have confirmed that it's going to have a plug-in hybrid model. And I have to tell you, if you're a Jeep fan and you get a load of this new Wrangler, which will be out next year, your first impression from looking at it on the outside is not too much has changed. But it's all new. It's a totally new architecture. Inside is probably the biggest change, and I think a little gimmicky. It's gone from stark to modern to now like there looks like there's more toys than you can shake a stick at. So I guess it's for a younger, more street-bound group that just wants to look tough. But it's a pretty significant vehicle. There's a new small SUV coming from Toyota. They showed the something called the FTAC concept. Think Crosstrek from Subaru, and you get an idea of what market that's going to go after. There's other new vehicles. There's a new small SUV from Hyundai called the Kona, which uses an Atkins cycle and a plug-in feature. Let's see. It was a good show, a good solid show. A new small SUV from Nissan called the Kicks that'll probably eventually replace the Juke. Refresh of the Mazda 6, which may be the last time they offer a mid-size sedan. Nobody knows. And some other stuff. So it was a good, solid show, but I don't think anything blew anybody's socks off, with possible exception of having that Infinity variable compression turbo engine actually go into a vehicle. So,
John, a question.
Oh,
that
yeah.
engine.
There was one more thing. Yeah.
That engine, I first saw the diagrams and some video and so on of it. 6 months to a year ago. And
it was a year ago at the Paris show.
Yeah, and there has been almost zero press on that engine. And why is it? Because it's really a significant accomplishment.
Well, I think it's like anything. Well, a couple things. I think number one, it wasn't attached to a vehicle, so for anybody that wasn't a real automotive techie, it just sort of went right over their heads, because car makers show us, conceptual powertrains all the time, and a lot of times they're pie in the sky, and you never hear from them again. We all remember the ceramic engine, which was so hot about 20 years ago, and it never really happened. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing is, when you get beyond the core automotive press, nobody wants to talk about the possibility that internal combustion engines still have a lot of life yet. All they want to talk about is electrics. And the fact is, this popularity of electrics, which is somewhat overblown, is spurring new development in internal combustion engines. And even the most optimistic forecasts about electric vehicles still say 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 80 to 85% of the vehicles are still going to be running around on gas and diesel when you look at a worldwide situation. So I think it's just not a popular topic. But the very fact that someone has now taken a gas engine and putting it in a premium vehicle, so it's got to be basically pretty smooth and work pretty well, and it can give you everything a diesel can without the diesel emission problems and everything else, that's a huge jump. We're talking 30% better fuel economy. That's enormous. That alone, if that got used industry-wide, would meet most of the fuel economy requirements for the next 20 years that various governments have. So it's a huge deal, but I think it's just not electric. So, the tech, the high technology people that are only really interested in electronics and stuff like that, they haven't really paid much attention to it. So I guess that's the reason. It's just not the flavor of the month.
When you look at that improved fuel economy, if you factor in the difference in price between gas and diesel, it gets even better.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
So,
and they're going to put this thing, of course, in a high-end vehicle, but I guarantee you, within 2 years, that will make its way down to core Nissan products. So now you're talking about the potential of having, like a Pathfinder, a 3-row, 7 to 8 passenger SUV with a gasoline engine that's got good fuel economy and good power, delivering, probably 35 miles per gallon without even batting an eye. That's 10 more than today, and I think that's that's very doable, and that's going to be pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, John, we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Folks, if you have a question for John Davis from MotorWeek, get on the line right now, 844-885-4677. Get on the line, give him a call. He'll answer your questions. Coming up here on Goss's Garage.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Never drive with a bad attitude. I know that's hard with so many stupid, distracted, aggressive, and just plain rude drivers on the road, but it really is the safe thing to do. I drive a lot, and I used to see reckless, rude, or aggressive drivers maybe once a month. But today, it seems like every other driver is doing something stupid. When it was sporadic, it wasn't so hard to deal with, but now it seems like there's always an idiot 3 feet from my rear bumper or weaving into my lane or cutting me off. Distracted? Probably. Dangerous? Absolutely. But there's nothing to do except drive defensively and not aggravate other drivers. Much as I'd like to, I don't middle finger the offending driver, and definitely don't hit my brakes to scare a tailgater. Initially, these situations may be simple mistakes, but an aggressive response to a mistake can escalate it into a personal confrontation, which can easily turn into road rage. Unfortunately, you have no idea which one of these idiots will try to hurt you with their car, a weapon, or their fists. Also, never make direct eye contact with the offending driver. If you're the offender, be courteous and get out of the way. Whether it's a mistake or intentional aggression, remember, back down, yield, let it go. It takes brains to overcome anger. Use your brain. Be smart. I get lots of air filter questions, and one of the most common deals with why air filters need to be replaced so often. Well, actually, they usually don't, yet many drivers wind up buying a new air filter at every oil change, which is utterly ridiculous. Drivers say techs tell them if they don't buy a new air filter, they'll waste a lot of gas. Maybe that statement comes from ignorance or maybe dishonesty, but either way, you lose. Decades ago, dirty air filters did waste gas, but today, not so much. Cars now use a sensor to measure the air coming through the air filter, and computers to mix exactly the right amount of gas to match that air. So even though a dirty air filter reduces airflow into the engine, it doesn't affect gas mileage because the computer is always precisely matching fuel to the incoming air. In other words, a dirty filter means less air, and less air means less gas, so there's never an imbalance between air and fuel. Certainly when a filter gets really, really dirty, it can cause performance problems, but even then it may not affect gas mileage. So how long do air filters last? Unless you drive in really dusty conditions, air filters usually last 30 to 60,000 miles. Overselling of air filters is an enormous problem, and the best way not to be taken is to learn how to check your own air filter and check it twice a year.
Now, back to Goss's Garage with your host, Pat Goss.
All right, folks, I'm sure you know what this is. It's the thermostat housing, but it has a plug in it. Do you know what that plug is for? Well, if you don't, check us out on YouTube at Goss Garage, because I'm going to tell you what that's for, and it is very important. And for those enjoying Goss's Garage on TuneIn.com, please note our new showtime every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. All right, we have John Davis from MotorWeek on the line. John, you still with us?
Yeah, Pat, and I want to talk, because I'm going to be going in a few minutes, I want to talk about one other new vehicle that we have into the shop that is very, very impressive, and I would be willing to bet most people don't know even exists. It's a version of the Cadillac CT6, which is their big sedan, and it's their plug-in hybrid. And not only, it's an interesting vehicle in that while we've seen luxury plug-in hybrids from the Europeans, we've really not seen a great deal from domestic manufacturers. The CT6 is a very, very modern vehicle. It has what they call an electric variable transmission, which is a combination of the continuously variable transmission with two electric motors all in one case, very compact. You can drive it at speed for up to 31 miles before the gas engine kicks in, so it meets the requirements that a lot of European cities are talking about, where you can't drive in the city during work hours on petrol or diesel. Very luxurious. It only comes in one trim level. Nice riding car, nice driving car. A little old-fashioned for my taste as far as ride and handling, but a very, very impressive technological achievement. The gas engine, by the way, is a 2-liter turbo, which is going to turn some traditional Cadillac buyers off, but believe me, it's plenty of power. It's pretty impressive when you combine it with the electric motors.
What do you know what the magic is with these 2-liter turbos? I mean, everybody seems to have one, and the majority of them are amazing in the way they perform.
Well, what drives it is taxes. In most countries around the world, or at least developed countries or ones that consume a lot of cars, there is a tax based on the displacement, and 2 liters tends to be where the taxes escalate beyond 2 liters. So it's kind of the ceiling. So 1.6, 1.8, 2-liter, and now with a turbo is where everybody is pretty much headed, getting rid of your 3.5 and 3-liter V6s and so forth in exchange for a turbo strapped to under 2-liter 4-cylinder, in some cases 3-cylinder. So it's taxes and also the emissions. The larger a displacement, the more fuel is burned, and that's kind of like a general rule. And with the new requirements for emissions that are emerging around the world, particularly now in China, you've got to be under 2 liters or you're just spewing too much stuff out the back, no matter how good your catalyst is. It all comes down to CO2.
Yeah, well, I got to say that this new crop of 2-liter engines, the majority of them are pretty impressive.
Well, with you strap the turbo on it, and you're talking about, in most cases 300 horsepower. This particular situation with this Cadillac, you've got over 300 horsepower. I think it's 335. And then you look at its competition, like the BMW 740e plug-in, it's 322. So that 300-plus horsepower with a turbo and maybe an electric motor is going to be kind of like the new benchmark. 300 horsepower, think about that, from a 2-liter engine. It wasn't too many years ago that you had to have a big block V8 and you still didn't get that much power.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, it's an amazing time to be dealing with automobiles because there's just fascinating things going on.
It is, and I must say, I don't know if you've kept up with it the last couple of weeks. They're running a series of of articles in Automotive News, one of the industry publications, about, where we're headed. And I'm still not on board that, 5, 10, 15 years, everybody's going to be running around in some kind of autonomous pod, or you're going to call an Uber and nobody is going to own a car. That may be fine if you live in a densely packed big city. But if you think about the economics, if you live in a rural area, and I mean just a suburb of a major city like D.C. or Baltimore or New York, nobody can afford to have these huge fleets of driverless vehicles sitting around unused all day waiting for you to get home or go to work. It doesn't make economic sense. I just don't see it, and I don't see people voluntarily turning in their keys. Granted, maybe, a new generation coming up might be inclined, but the older generations are going to be around for another 60, 70 years. So I just don't see it. I just think it's so much hype, and I just have a hard time wrapping my hands around some of the predictions, or head around some of the predictions.
Yeah, I'm.
How about you? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I'm with you 100%. I mean, there isn't going to be this mass extinction of everything that we know that's going to happen literally almost overnight. I mean, the practical aspects of all of that just don't make sense. Yes, maybe in 50 years, 75, something like that.
Yeah.
But 5, 10, 20 years, the dynamics of it just don't work.
Can you imagine in this country the uproar that would happen if a politician got up there and said, 10 years from now, you have to give up your car, or 15, or 20?
Yeah.
Even making a prediction. Now, okay, it could happen in some other countries that are more used to, shall we say, a one-person or one-party rule, but I just don't see it. When every little thing here causes huge commotions and backlash against politicians, they barely have to open their mouths before they've got everybody on their backs. I just don't see it happening. And if the environmentalists start pushing this really hard, which they have in Europe to some degree, that could cause a backlash to them. So, I hate to equate it, but something like that would be about as controversial as gun control. But I really think it would be on a similar level.
Right. I agree 100%.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right, John. Well, I know you need to depart us here. So
sorry about that. Sorry I can't stick around, but it was certainly a pleasure, and I'm thanks for having me on to talk about the LA Auto Show. It's a big show. Now it's all eyes towards Detroit. A few weeks we'll be there.
Very good. Well, thank you, John. Hopefully we'll talk very soon.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, take care. All right, John Davis from MotorWeek. Always a pleasure to have him on with us. Let's go to Ocala, Florida, and talk to Shepard with a 2000 Chevy S10. Shepard, welcome to Goss's Garage.
Hi, Pat. Good to speak to you again. I just wanted to add one thing to Mr. Davis. I'm from a major metropolitan area, and I can tell you that the people in New York, Boston, Washington, L.A., most of them, the ones who are pushing this no-car thing in 15 years, they have no clue what it's like living in rural Florida, rural Texas, rural Oklahoma. To them, that's all flyover country, but that's my take on it. I bought an S10 6 years ago with 74,000 miles on it, 2.2-liter four-cylinder engine. The engine was destroyed due to lack of maintenance. The previous owner seized it up, cracked it. I replaced the engine along with a myriad of other new parts, including many of the emission control components, such as the charcoal canister, the switching valve, all of the hoses. And I have one little problem that is driving me up the wall as an ex-technician. if I drive the thing on a super hot day like we have in Florida, say 95 degrees, I go from Ocala to Gainesville or Ocala to Orlando, a distance of 60 to, say, 100 miles. The check engine light pops on, and it's always a P0452 code, which means that the fuel tank pressure sensor sensed incorrect pressure for more than 4 seconds. Fine. I turn the light off, and I don't see it again for another few months. The funny thing is, this only happens when it's in hot weather. I can drive this thing. I've driven it from Central Florida to the Canadian border and back again around November. Never happens. Never have a problem. And as I said, I've replaced all these different components, and it is driving me up the wall. The truck runs great. It's my daily driver, but what say you on this situation?
Well, have you tested and or replaced the pressure sensor?
I went ahead and replaced the pressure sensor, the charcoal canister. The charcoal canister was crystallized. You could shake it and hear the charcoal shaking around in it. So I replaced the charcoal canister, the switching valve, the pressure sensor. The fuel pump is new. Everything under the hood is new because, I figured I'm in for a dime, in for a dollar.
All right.
And other than that, the truck runs fantastic. I've used it for work and I've used it for play. It's just that in hot weather, drive 60, 70 miles, the check engine light comes on. It's always that same exact code.
All right. Now, have you unplugged and reconnected all of the connectors in the wire harness that relate to that sensor?
No, sir. When I replaced the sensor, I have, of course, unplugged it to replace it.
Right, but they're probably upstream. There are going to be connectors. There's going to be, where it connects into the ECM and all different things like that. Because sometimes what we see is that there's just a teeny little bit of invisible corrosion that alters the current flow through a connector, and it puts it right on that borderline so that anything that's even close to an overpressure situation triggers the light.
I have not disconnected the ECM or any of those connectors. I will try that, sir.
Okay.
I do appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Let's hope it helps.
That's
all right. Now let's go to Pennsylvania and talk to Kevin. High Octane. Kevin, what can we do for you?
Hi, Pat. Question for you on premium fuel versus regular gas. I'm looking into getting a new car, and it is premium fuel recommended. Now, some are they want you to use a premium fuel. In this car, they're recommending it. How important is it to use that fuel that they're recommending versus using regular gasoline?
All right. Typically, when it is recommended, what they're going to say is for best performance or best fuel economy, premium fuel recommended. But then it'll also say that you can use 87. So premium fuel recommended, they did something in testing that vehicle that they used premium fuel and they were trying to achieve something, and they got some kind of a spec, a fuel economy spec or a 0 to 60 time or something like that. Maybe they were a thousandth of a second off of say a 6-second 0 to 60. And they found that by putting premium fuel in it, they could get that extra thousandth of a second and meet the standard. Now they advertise it as 0 to 60 in 6 seconds instead of 6.1, which is a big deal. Now, once they did that, they have to say for best something, premium fuel recommended. Well, for day-to-day driving on cars like that, 87 is fine.
Okay, that answered my question. So On other cars, it says it's necessary versus recommended.
Yeah.
Those cars you have to put it in.
You certainly should. When it says premium fuel required, then you should be using premium. But premium fuel recommended, and if you read in the owner's manual, you'll more than likely see that it'll say for best something. And then as you read through all of the fine print and so on, it'll say that it can run on 87, and that's the way to go because, you know, you actually get more energy out of a gallon of 87 than you do out of a gallon of 93.
Okay, great. That really helped out a lot.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you. All right, let's take a break. We'll be right back on Goss's Garage.
Operators are standing by to take your call for Pat at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
I get lots of air filter questions, and one of the most common deals with why air filters need to be replaced so often. Well, actually, they usually don't, yet many drivers wind up buying a new air filter at every oil change, which is utterly ridiculous. Drivers say techs tell them if they don't buy a new air filter, they'll waste a lot of gas. Maybe that statement comes from ignorance or maybe dishonesty, but either way, you lose. Decades ago, dirty air filters did waste gas, but today, not so much. Cars now use a sensor to measure the air coming through the air filter, and computers to mix exactly the right amount of gas to match that air. So even though a dirty air filter reduces airflow into the engine, it doesn't affect gas mileage because the computer is always precisely matching fuel to the incoming air. In other words, a dirty filter means less air, and less air means less gas, so there's never an imbalance between air and fuel. Certainly when a filter gets really, really dirty, it can cause performance problems, but even then it may not affect gas mileage. So how long do air filters last? Unless you drive in really dusty conditions, air filters usually last 30 to 60,000 miles. Overselling of air filters is an enormous problem, and the best way not to be taken is to learn how to check your own air filter and check it twice a year. Space Saver spare tires sure do look silly, but if you use them properly, they will get you home safely. Now, a common problem with them is low air pressure. Spares are buried in the trunk and no one ever seems to check their pressure. Plus, they typically require much higher pressure than your regular tires. Also, Space Saver spares have limits on how far and how fast you can drive on them. Bottom line, always read and follow the caution warnings on their labels and sidewalls. Oh yeah, don't be one of those poor schmucks with a flat tire and a flat spare. Check your spare once a month. While checking the spare, look at the jack handle, and the lug wrench to be sure everything is there and in working order. The best spare tire in the world is useless without the tools to put it on the car. Some cars may even require special lug nuts to mount the spare. If those special lug nuts are missing, you will have no safe way to use your spare.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. And now, Pat Goss.
All right, folks. Hey, you certainly know that this is the thermostat housing, but notice that it has a plug in it. Do you know what that plug is for? It is crucial as far as doing some of the servicing on the car. But most people don't know about that plug and what they're supposed to do with it. If you want to find out, check out Goss's Garage on YouTube. We'll have the answer to this up on the air a little later in the week. All right, now, tune in to Goss's Garage, please, on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, and for more car tips, tricks, and money-saving ideas, visit goss-garage.com. Oh, also remember that at goss-garage.com, you can get a free download on an aftermarket service recommendation chart and accident report form, different things like that that we supply to you folks who listen to the show. Give me a call if you want to talk about anything automotive, 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-4677. Sam wants to know. He says, Pat, I have a 14 Audi A6 Quattro with the 2.0T engine. I was wondering if BG44K and MOA are safe to use in this engine. Well, Sam, number one, I no longer represent BG products. Period. Dot. They have changed how they want to do their advertising. I am no longer supporting them in the direction they're heading. The products are good. I use them. I sell them. But as far as endorsing them or anything, no. Can you use them in your Audi? Yeah, I use them in my Audi. And mine is a Q5, has the same engine, and so on. Absolutely. Works fine. All right, now, also, Pete was asking me about the difference between getting a flush as opposed to a fluid refill on his automatic transmission. I believe this car was maybe an '04, something like that. Chrysler Corporation, or maybe it was a 14, I don't know. Anyway, it was a relatively low mileage vehicle. He took the car to the dealer. The dealer says, oh no, he says, your transmission doesn't need anything. Takes it to an independent. Independent says, well, you don't want to flush it because flushing puts so much pressure on the transmission. It can blow out seals and so on. So what we recommend is you drop the pan, you drain the fluid out, you clean the pan, you put a new filter in there, and by golly, we fill it with fresh fluid and you're good to go. Good God. What a bunch of crap all of that is. All right, number one, flushing a transmission does not apply pressure to the transmission. Now, what it does, it uses the circulation of the transmission fluid. It has cooling lines and everything that where the fluid comes out goes up through a cooler and back into the transmission. It uses that normal circulation, doesn't put any pressure on the transmission. All right, so as far as flushing, blowing out seals and all of that, those are the words of an idiot that does not know anything about flushing. Why don't they know anything about flushing? Because they can sell this other service, make a lot more profit at the end of the day, do you a disservice, because the fact of the matter is that dropping the pan and replacing part of the fluid can actually decrease the life of your automatic transmission. Now, the reason for that is real simple. See, in the transmission, in the front of it, in order to make it so that you can come to a stop and things don't bind up and it stall the engine, they have a torque converter. Torque converter is bolted to the back of the engine, big round device, and it has vanes on the inside of it, and as it spins with the engine, these vanes cause fluid to move. All right, now that fluid, as it starts to move, moves against vanes that are in the center of this. So you got fluid being moved by the outer vanes, causing the inner ones to spin, and it's that reaction that causes the car to move. So when it's sitting still, the engine is idling, and there isn't enough movement of the fluid to make the car move. When you rev it up a little bit, you step on the gas, the fluid starts to move. It moves faster. That moves the inner portion of this torque converter, and that drives the car. Okay. Now, because that torque converter, it's a big hollow chamber, it spins at the speed of the engine. Now, a lot of engines these days out on the highway, cruising speed, are going to be turning 2,000 to 3,000 revolutions per minute. Now, you've got this fluid in there that is being sloshed around by the torque converter, and you have what's called centrifugal force. And centrifugal force causes the fluid to try to move toward the outside of this torque converter. But what it also does is there are particles of dirt. And the dirt is heavier. The heavier the particles, the more the centrifugal force reacts on them. And it causes this dirt to be separated out of the fluid and gets flung against the inside of the torque converter. Now that builds up over time, because as things wear inside the transmission, clutch material and different things like that, it sheds these little dirt particles. They're very, very fine. And as it goes through the torque converter, the centrifugal action causes this dirt to be thrown out of suspension in the fluid, and it sticks to the inside of the torque converter. Right now it builds up. Now, you take your car in for a flush. Now, in the flush, what happens is we put a chemical in the transmission and we run the car. And that chemical softens that material, that dirt that has accumulated in there, gets it back into suspension with the fluid. And then as the fluid circulates out and through the filters and everything in the transmission flush machine, remember, no extra pressure, just normal transmission pressure. This dirt is trapped and quarantined inside the flush machine away from the car. So what you're doing with a flush is you're cleaning the inside of the transmission using chemicals, and then the dirt is being circulated out, hence the flush, and it is quarantined outside the car, can't get back in. All right, that's a big plus. But now let's suppose you go to one of these people that is more concerned with money at the end of the day than they are giving you a good service and making your car last longer and all such as that. Or they're just generally stupid and don't know about how things work. Now they tell you, oh, we're going to drop the pan. Yeah, we're going to drop the pan. Going to put a new filter in there. Okay, if it even has a filter. And we're going to put fresh fluid in there and you're good and no problems with all that flush crap. All right, if that's the way you see it. But we're probably going to charge you as much money as you'd pay for a flush. And what's going to happen inside your transmission? Well, when you do that, you only replace about 1/3 of the fluid. So that means 2/3 of the fluid in your transmission is old and dirty. Now, the other thing that happens is that third new fluid that you put into that transmission, that has higher detergent. The detergent hasn't worn out like it has in the old fluid that's in there. So you get more detergent in there, and now as you drive, not in a controlled circumstance with a flush machine hooked up, But as you drive, that added new detergent causes this dirt and everything in the torque converter to come loose. Now, you think of this stuff and you say, well, I got a filter in there. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But even if you do have a filter, most of this stuff is so fine that it'll pass right through the filter. And most cars have, these days, have screens or something. They don't have the traditional old-fashioned filter anyway. All right, so now, as you drive, you loosen up this crud, and then you start circulating it. There's no place for it to go. It's a closed circuit, so it can't go anyplace other than circulate through the transmission. And as it circulates through the transmission, it causes wear on clutches and valves and different things like that. And it keeps circulating through the transmission. And it causes more wear over time. More wear causes more dirt. Until eventually you have got enough dirt, enough crud, and so on, that you have a transmission problem. Now, you didn't save any money. You didn't save your transmission. You didn't do anything by dropping the pan and changing 1/3 of the fluid. All you did was shorten the life of your transmission. Now, other things to consider. Transmission fluid has what are called friction modifiers. Now, think of friction modifiers as being like sandpaper. You know, you can get sandpaper that's really smooth. You can barely feel that it's sandpaper. And you use it for sanding painted surfaces and so on, so you can buff them and things like that. Or you might want something to strip the paint off of a car or a piece of furniture or something, real coarse. You grab it, oh my goodness, it just grabs right a hold of your skin. All right, well, friction modifiers are like that in transmission fluid. They determine how aggressively the fluid grips the clutches. It allows the clutches, when a bunch of them come together, and there'll be stacks of these clutches, there'll be a metal clutch and then a composite clutch, metal composite, and use hydraulic pressure to squeeze this clutch pack together. And as it comes together, the various pieces in there have to grab one another in the right amount of tension, of grip, and so on. All right, so over time, these friction modifiers, now some companies want the really fine friction modifiers, like the wet or dry sandpaper. So the clutches grab very, very delicately. Other manufacturers choose to use friction modifiers that are like the coarse sandpaper you would strip paint with, and they just grab. Well, over time, these friction modifiers wear out. Now, you've replaced a portion of them. You've replaced 1/3 of them in most cases by doing this drop the pan and so on, but you haven't replaced all of them. The modifiers, the friction modifiers in the rest of the fluid in there, they're worn out. So now, let's say yours required something that was pretty aggressive. So now every time you shift a gear, or the transmission shifts gears, when those clutches come together with worn out friction modifiers, the clutches slip. Now, the more slippage we have, it feels good to you because it means you can't feel the shifts, but it's not good for the clutches and other parts like that. I mean, it's like riding your brakes all the time. As these friction modifiers wear out, the clutches come together and they slip. The more slippage we have, the more heat we have, The more heat we have, the more damage to the fluid. The more damage to the fluid, the more wear to the clutches, and so on. It becomes a vicious cycle. So this is why you flush. You don't drain and refill. You don't do a fluid exchange, because they only change part of the fluid. And that's a big deal. It really, truly is a big deal, because the transmission will wear out more rapidly due to not having the right additives, the right amount, the right type, and all of this stuff. So, are they doing you any favors? No, they're doing themselves a favor, because they're going to make more profit. See, a transmission flush takes an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes longer than that, depending on how tricky it is to get hooked up to the transmission and so on, and how dirty the fluid is and different things like that. But the fact of the matter is, you want a flush. Now, this is where you're in a quick lube lane someplace, dealership, independent, quick lube shop, whatever it might be, and they say, gee, your transmission needs to be flushed. Okay. How long does it take? Oh, we can have you out of here in 20 minutes, half an hour. Well, automatically you know that they can't do a full flush in that amount of time, and in many cases they couldn't even get a flush machine hooked up. So what are they doing? Well, many times what they're doing is they're doing what's called a fluid exchange, which on cars that still have a transmission dipstick tube, you run two hoses down into this dipstick tube. One of them is longer than the other. Now, what happens is that the longer one is a suction tube. It's sucking fluid out of the transmission down at the bottom. The shorter one is an injection tube. So we're putting fluid in on the shorter one. We're drawing the fluid from the bottom up through the longer tube, and all we're doing is changing what's in the pan, because these tubes can't go anyplace inside the transmission. They can't get up inside the torque converter or do anything like that. So you're not cleaning anything. You're not getting all of the old fluid out. You're not doing anything that is really beneficial to the transmission, and in many cases it is detrimental. So what you're looking for is a transmission fluid flush. And also make sure that the shop that does it for you, that they use the proper fluid for your car. There's proprietary fluid for just about every car out there. And one of the things that's different from one car to another, the friction modifiers. So you want the proper fluid with the proper friction modifiers in your car. Folks, we've done it one more time. Thank you for listening. And of course, thanks to Steve McMillan for producing today's show. For everyone here at Goss's Garage, I'm Pat Goss. Until next time, big favor to ask of you. Would love to have you back next week. So, in the meantime, please drive gently. See you next week.